Alright, let's visit our friends centrifugal and centripetal forces again and see how they apply at the state scale. I can see in your eyes you are so stoked to get into this. So if you're ready to get them brain cows milked failed state style, then let's get to it. Okay, on the assumption that your memory is a little, dusty, then let me remind you of what we learned in Unit 3 about centrifugal and centripetal forces, but here we're going to apply it to political geography. Centrifugal forces are developments that disrupt the internal organization of a state, and they include things like ethnic tension or political turmoil or whatever else leads to the pulling apart of states and their people. Therefore, when these forces are present, they often lead to calls for devolution or in some cases, territorial fragmentation. So, centrifugal forces, all our crap is breaking apart. On the other hand, centripetal forces are developments that unite people and work to support the sovereignty of a state. And these developments can include a strong sense of nationalism among a people or a strong and cohesive central government. So that means centripetal forces, all our crap is united and strong. And if you're having trouble remembering the difference between these two, then think of it this way. Centrifugal has that F in the middle and you can associate that with falling apart. Centripetal has that P and you can associate that with pulling together. Easy peasy, ham and cheesy, y'all. Okay, definitions unlocked and memory cobwebs are cleared away. But before we get into the main meal of this video, namely the consequences of those forces at a state level, let me just remind you that if you need help getting an A in your class and a 5 on your exam in May, then you might want to check out my AP Human Geography Heimler review guide. It's got exclusive unit review videos from this guy that are not here on YouTube. They got note guides to follow along, practice questions, practice exams, and answer keys for every dang bit of it. And I don't think it's too much to say that this resource will act as a powerful centripetal force to help you bring all the concepts of the course together and crush that national exam. So if you're interested, that link is in the description. Okay, now let's get to munching on the main entree here. And first, let's consider the 4 main consequences of centrifugal forces at the state level. Now, the first potential consequence of the presence of centrifugal forces is a failed state, which describes a state that has become so weak that the government is no longer in control. And you know Big Daddy government loves to run everybody's crap, so this is kind of a big deal when it happens. And although there is debate about exactly how to determine whether a state has failed, there are a few big markers that generally signal a failed state. For example, internal corruption of the government is a big marker of a failed state, and we can see this in North Korea. Or religious and ethnic conflicts can lead to a failed state like we see in Yemen and Turkey. The point is, when Big Daddy government enters into failed state territory, it can no longer provide the basic necessities for its people like security or healthcare, a working judicial system, or protection for voting rights, etc., etc. Okay, the second potential consequence of centrifugal forces includes uneven development, which means that some parts of the state are more developed and some are less developed. In India, for example, there are sharp geographical differences between very wealthy populations and very poor populations. Like, look at all this fancy housing right next to all this impoverished housing in Mumbai. And you can see examples just like this all throughout the country, and often these wealthy areas are demarcated by walls so that the fancy schmancy people don't have to interact with the impoverished rabble in the shanty towns. And not surprisingly, that kind of uneven development where these people have access to all the resources and these people have almost nothing can lead to resentment and in some cases demonstrations and violence and thus centrifugal forces. Okay, third, centrifugal forces can be the result of the presence of stateless nations. And here let's visit our friends the Kurds again, who, if you'll remember, are a distinct nation that lives in parts of Syria, Iraq, Iran, and Turkey. And because they are a distinct cultural unit without a state of their own, their calls for independence and political sovereignty have created profound tension within the states which claim political power over them. For example, in Turkey, the government has labeled a prominent Kurdish political party as a terrorist organization, and that has justified their violent attacks on the Kurds. Thus, yet again, centrifugal forces. And then the fourth potential consequence of centrifugal forces includes ethnic nationalist movements. Now, these tend to occur in a state where at least 2 distinct ethnic groups coexist within the same political boundary. And you know, sometimes they can coexist peacefully like the Walloon and Flemish groups in Belgium, but other times, not so much. But more often than not, a majority ethnic group is in power and they end up marginalizing the minority ethnic groups under their power. For example, after Sudan gained independence from Britain in the 20th century, the majority Muslim government made attempts to Islamicize the minority Christian population in the South. And as a result of that, and a whole lot of other factors, not least nationalism in the South, civil war broke out and South Sudan became an independent state in 2011. Okay, so I admit centrifugal forces at the state level can be kind of, a bummer. So let's finish by considering 3 major consequences of centripetal forces at the state level, things that result in something like a big national HUD. First, centripetal forces can lead to ethno-nationalism, which is a sense of pride and identity tied to a territory composed of a singular ethnic group. Now, I can see that you've grown a question mark over your head because didn't I say before that ethnic groups like the Kurds who long for a state of their own can be a centrifugal force? An excellent question, my young pupil. Yes, ethno-nationalism can be a centrifugal force as well, as we see in the case of stateless nations like the Kurds. But in different circumstances, it can be a unifying centripetal force. For example, recently, Russia has threatened to annex Belarus, but that threat has created a sense of nationalism and cultural cohesion among Belarusians and a desire to resist Russian intrusion. Okay, second, equitable infrastructure development can be a consequence of centripetal forces. So when a country country invests in roads and power and clean drinking water, for example, this can have a way of binding people together in support of a state, which can lead to economic growth and better standards of living. In other words, when the government does its job and takes care of its people instead of acting like an exclusivist or tyrannical turd, people tend to unite around supporting that government. And third, increased cultural cohesion can be a consequence of centripetal forces, and that just means that a state's society is culturally united. And since most countries in the world are multinational states, governments promote nationalism as a means to unite various groups. And they do this through education systems or national icons like flags or national anthems. Or international sports is a big one here. Every 4 years, countries across the globe compete in the Olympics or the World Cup, and success in these events has a way of tying a state's people together. Well, okay, it's the end of the unit, so click here if you want help studying, and you can grab my AP Human Geography Heimler review guide. Or you can click here if you want to keep reviewing other topics in Unit 4. And that's it. I'll catch you on the flip-flop, and I'll see you in Unit 5. Heimler out.